Welcome back to my studio. My name is Monica, and today I thought it would be fun to paint a holiday card. I'm going to be doing a couple of little holiday card videos, and this one we're going to paint gnomes in watercolor. And what I love so much about painting gnomes is that they are super, super easy to paint, and you can really personalize them with your own color palette and the details that we're going to put in their little hats. So I'm going to show you how to paint one, and I'll also show you how I lay out my card, but I'm probably going to speed up a good portion of this video simply because once you know how to paint one, you can paint three. And it'll get boring if you're watching me paint all three doing the same process. So that's my plan, and I want to go over a couple of the supplies that I'm using. So first off, with the paper, I actually just ripped out a piece of paper from this little book that I have, this Arches book. So this card measures, once I cut off the holes, it's about 4 3/4 by 6, and that's the card dimension. Once it's folded in half, it's 140 pounds, it's cold press, and it is 100% cotton. I would suggest working with 100% cotton if you can. If not, you can definitely work on pre-made watercolor cards. Those will work fine just as well. Some of the other things I'm going to be using are, of course, my watercolor palette. These are all Daniel Smith paints, and somebody made mention in one of my other videos, and I still have to go back and add the color list, but I wanted to go over the actual colors that I will be using mostly. So I'm definitely going to be working out of some of my reds, which are going to be an alizarin crimson, and this is a pyrrole scarlet. I am going to be also using a lot of gray. So I have some Payne's gray that I'll be using, and I'm also going to use a neutral tint. And the neutral tint that I'll be using is from Winsor & Newton. It is not a Daniel Smith. I just threw a bunch of colors that I liked in this palette, and I had a few extra spaces, so I put in some colors that I knew that I would be using. So I'll also be using a little bit of green, I think, and it'll be a mixture of the sap green, which I believe is a dark... No, that's just a sap green. A sap green and some ultramarine mixed into it, and I'll probably add a little bit of alizarin crimson, just kind of desaturate it a little bit. But as we go along, I'll tell you what I'm using. I've got my palette card handy, so I can let you know. So the next things that I'll be using will be a gel pen, and this will be for the details toward the end. And this is a Uniball Signo, and this is a really great pen. I'll also be using a Posca pen, and this is a bullet tip. This is not the extra fine tip. And honestly, you can, if you have Posca pens or if you have gel pens, you can use whatever you like, depending on the color palette that you choose. This is a 1.3 millimeter. So, and I also have here some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and I use this mostly for the beards, and you can use a white gouache too if you don't have this. And I've got some brushes here. You'll need a pencil. And this is, the brushes that I have are watercolor brushes, and these are all black velvet from the silver line, and I'll be using these in a range from a size 0, a 2, a 4, and a 6. And this little guy right here, I use to lift color out, and I like it because it's got a really nice springy tip. It doesn't matter if it's a watercolor brush, if you have a craft brush that's like that you can easily scrub it out or lift color with. This, something like that or a little more bristly will work great. So, and I'm also going to be using a pen. So this pen is I think this is, a brush sign pen, and it's an SBS. It's really difficult to see the name, SES 15. I'll leave it all in the description below, but I'm going to use my my sign pen to do some lettering, a little sentiment at the bottom of the card. So with all of that, I'm going to grab my pencil and we're going to go ahead and get started. So first thing I like to do, you might need some washi tape too, and mine is, this is probably 3/4 inch or an inch maybe. You can pick whatever width you'd like. What I'm going to do, and I do not measure, so everything that I do, I pretty much just eyeball. I want to decide where I want my gnomes, and I'm probably going to put them in the top 2/3 of the card. So I'm going to put my masking tape down here so I have a nice clean edge when I add my lettering. So I try to get this as straight as I can, like I said, just by eyeballing. And I usually just try to line it up with the bottom edge of the card. And then I'm going to grab my pencil and we're going to start mapping this out. So since I'm going to be doing 3 gnomes, I've got to decide, like I said, how tall I want them. And I don't want them to go anywhere past this line, really. I'll just pencil in a guide for myself. And I'm going to work a little bit darker on my card so that you can see it on camera. And then I'm going to find the center of my card. And again, like I said, I'm going to eyeball it. And if I'm off a little bit, it's really not a big deal. These are handmade cards. These are not, you know, computer created AI digital cards, or if I'm not 100% precise, it's not a big deal. So give yourself a little bit of a guide in the middle, and then we're going to break this rectangular shape down, and we're going to find the halfway mark for that. And I'm going to draw a little line and give myself another guide. So now I have this broken down into, these 2 boxes. And from here, we can go ahead and start mapping out our gnomes. And it's a really super, super simple shape. And if you think you can't draw, I challenge you to do this and you're going to surprise yourself, because these are all really super simple shapes and you can pretty much break down any object that you want to draw or paint into just simple shapes. So we're going to start off with their noses because that's going to be the easiest. And their noses are just a circle. And you can make them an oval if you want, or you can make them more round. I think if you make them all a little bit different, it just adds kind of to the cuteness factor. So I try to space them equal distances apart. And make them about the same size, relatively. And like I said, you can make different shapes. You can make them more oval, more round. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so from here, if you know how to draw a triangle, you're good to go. We're going to draw some simple triangles, and we're going to decide where we want our little hat to end, how far away from his nose. So you can make a little mark just so that you can get them even, and do that on all of them, just so you have a little bit of a guide. And then I'm gonna draw a triangle that starts up here, and if it's a wobbly line, that'll serve you better than a straight line, because these are hats, and we want to give the kind of feel that they're fabric, so drawing a straight line would not be good. So now that we've got our triangle, I'm going to go grab this line and I'm going to pull it down just a little bit below the nose. And then I'm going to start at this corner and I'm going to go right up above his nose and then right back down to meet the other side. And I'm going to do the same thing on the rest of these. Now, if you want to vary your hats, feel free. So like for this one, maybe I make this a Santa hat. So I'm just going to pull this out a little bit. Put a little ball at the end. And then I can go back in and erase some of those lines. And maybe this one, I'll just leave a tall hat. And I'll go down past his nose and then back up and around the nose and then back down. And the same with this guy. And you can adjust your space in between. If like this one, I think would be a little bit too wide. So I'm going to widen the hat a little bit just to make the space in between a little bit more even. And I think maybe for this one, I'm going to have this hat come over and make like a little spiral. And I'm going to go through here now, and I'm going to erase some of these lines where I made the adjustment to the hat. And I can still, you know, I can still play around with the shape of the hat. Same thing with this one. Okay, so now we have 3 noses and 3 hats, and we need to give him a beard and a body. So I start off by drawing the beard. It's another triangle shape that's a little bit on the rounded side that comes to a point like that. And for the body, I'm going to start at the edge of the hat, and I'm just going to make a rectangular, like a soft rectangle shape. I want the corners on the bottom to be kind of rounded. I don't want a hard, any hard angles really. And then the last part of this gnome is to add in some feet. And that's just a little half circle right at the bottom. And now we can go through and we can start erasing some of these lines. And after that, we can get started painting. Okay, so we are going to start, or I'm going to start with the middle one. And like I said, I wanted to show you how to paint one, and then you can block in the rest of yours. So I'm going to start, since this one is a Santa hat, I'm going to start with some red. And I think I'm going to make my hat just a little bit wider. And once you have your basic shapes in, that's where you can really start playing and kind of tweaking the things that you want to tweak. I'm going to make his hat a little bit wider and a little bit taller. And I want some variation between the 3 of them. I don't want them to all be the same height. So I'm going to make his hat over here just a little bit taller too. But I still want that spiral in there. So we've got a little bit of variety going on. And I'm going to spray my paint, get it activated, and then I'm going to mix some of this alizarin crimson with some of this pyrrole scarlet. And I'll get myself a nice puddle going on and a nice bright red. And I'm going to start painting and blocking in some of these areas. One thing I did forget was the little ruff on the Santa hat before I start painting. And I like to get rid of my pencil lines. They will show through your paint. If you don't mind how that looks, then you can absolutely leave them there. But I want to add in the ruff on the white ruff on the hat. So I'm just going to follow this same line because the hat is going to like bend a little bit, the ruff is, and then go back down. And that can come out a little bit further than the hat itself, like that. And I'll get rid of these pencil lines, and then I'll start putting in some paint, making sure I avoid the white part of the ruff. Just make sure you've got enough paint on your brush and enough water. Okay, so I've got a nice flat color in here. If you want to drop in a little bit of a darker, color, I could mix this with a little bit of blue. This is a ultramarine blue, and get like a nice deep red. You know, I could drop in a little bit of dark red in here where I know there's a shadow. And if you want to keep going with that idea of making these really three-dimensional, you can drop in some little shadows and maybe where it's bending. I think that's always fun to do. And you see me holding my brush perpendicular to the page. And anytime I'm in a really tight area, it doesn't matter how big my brush is, I'm just using the point to go in here and get into these really tight areas. So I'm going to leave him to dry, and I'm going to move on to an area that's not adjacent so that we don't have any bleeding into another color. So I'm going to stick with a color palette that's mostly gray and red and white. So I'm going to do his body in a gray. And I'll be using some of my neutral tint, and I'll probably mix it with some Payne's Gray. And I'll just get myself a nice puddle of gray going. And I'm going to go in here and get his body painted, and I'm going to skip the shoes. And I'm going to paint around his beard as well. And what we're doing is just blocking in color right now. And the fun part comes when we're done doing that and going back in and adding in all sorts of details. And don't worry if you're painting this and you accidentally, maybe go into part of the beard. We're going to take care of all of that. And we can make all sorts of adjustments after we're done blocking in everything. So best thing is just to keep painting. Don't worry about it. And we'll fix all that stuff when we get to the details. And if you do make a mistake, I feel like I went up too high with this gray, I'm just going to rinse my brush out. And I'm going to go in there with a little bit of water, and I'm going to blot it out the best that I can. And you don't want too much water on your brush if you do make a mistake and you want to scrub it out. I just don't want any like back runs of water. And that is my chair squeaking. It is so annoying. So if you hear that in the background, or you hear my dog just like on cue, she starts barking. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this with the dryer, and when we come back, we're going to, we'll address the rest of this. Okay, so for all of the white areas, we're actually going to use the same gray that we just painted for the body. And the only difference is that I'm going to add a lot of water. I'm going to add a lot of water to my puddle so that it's really, really light. And you can do this with purple. You can do this with blue. We're just using what I have here as a shadow color. And if we want something to appear as white and kind of pop off the page, there needs to be something under it, like a shadow color, in order for the white to show up. So that's what I'm going to do with his beard. I'm just going to paint a flat wash of this really light gray all over his beard. And I'm going to do the same thing for this white ruff on the hat and for this little ball up here. And I wanted this to go out a little bit further than the hat. And then we'll do the same thing up here for this little ball hanging off the hat. Okay, and while that's drying, we can do the shoes. So the shoes I'm using, I'm not even sure what this is. I think it's a moon glow or a shadow violet. I think that's what this is. It's not a true black, but I'm going to mix that with a little bit of my Payne's gray and get a really nice dark color. You can do a mixture of an ultramarine and a burnt sienna if you want to get a really nice dark color. So I'm just mixing a bunch of stuff together until I get something that's really quite dark. So, and I'm going to paint this with not a lot of water. I want it to be mostly pigment. And when I paint this, I'm going to skip around the highlight. Now, if you don't get this in the first go and you accidentally paint the whole shape in a dark color, don't worry about it, because you can always go back in and add the highlight later. But I'll just show you how I would do this because it's like a one and done. So I'm just going to trace around the outside of his shoe, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'll just make the same shape, echo, and leave a little white part like that. And then I've got to decide where I want the highlight. I think maybe on the top. So I'm going to close in most of this except for just a little bit right on the top of the boot. So just like that. And I'll do the same thing over here. So you make the outline, then you echo the shape and leave a big white empty space. Decide where you want the highlight and then close off the rest of it with color. Like that. And his boots are done. Okay, so I think I'm gonna dry this with the heat gun and then we'll work on the nose. So for his nose, I'm gonna do a flesh color, and I'm gonna use a little bit of, I think this is quinacridone magenta. It's just a really cool pink color, and maybe some yellow ochre, until I get this nice orangey color. And if you have scrap paper, which I always try to have next to me, you can do a little test, and that's really red. So I'm gonna add some more yellow to this. And I definitely want to add a lot of water because it's not gonna be a dark color. And that could still stand a little bit of yellow. So maybe I'll go in here with a little bit of this lemon yellow. And I can always desaturate this by adding in a complementary color. And this is a little orangey, so maybe just a smidge of blue. And that's more about where I want it. So I'm gonna add more water to my puddle. And I'm just gonna paint his nose. And I'm actually gonna go ahead and paint all 3 noses since I have this color mixed up, because I wanna add a little bit of a shadow, I think. And I can do that all at the same time. And once I show you how to paint this one, you can work like in a batch anyway. So you can paint all the hats at one time, block in all the bodies at one time, that kind of thing. But I just wanted to show you how to do one at least, and then set you free. Okay. So if I want to make a little bit of a shadow color, I would just add a little bit more blue. I'm going to add a little more ultramarine to this and desaturate it even more. And it's gets to be a little bit of a muddy kind of a color, and that'll make a nice shadow. So since I did the shadow on the right side of the hat, I'm going to continue on the same side. So I definitely want a shadow on the top of his nose, because the hat's going to create a shadow. So I can drop in a little bit of that color there, and I can drop in a little bit of color here. And I've got to wait for this one and this one to dry just a little bit. And I think I should have waited on this one as well, simply because if it's too wet, the color will really spread. So I can take my brush is damp, I dried it off, and I'm gonna lift out some color here in the middle. And that can act as a little bit of a highlight too. So I'm gonna drop in some more of this darker color. And I might have to mix up a little bit more. We'll see. I'm gonna dry these with a heat gun just for a second. And I'm gonna mix up a little bit more of that color that I just had. So So now my paper is really dry since I dried it with the heat gun. And the only thing that I need to do is rinse my brush out, kind of tap it off on my paper towel. And then I'm going to run my wet brush along the edge. It's not soaking, it's just damp. So I'm going to run my brush along the edge just to soften out that edge a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing with the rest of these. Okay, so we've got a little bit of dimension in the nose. So these are pretty good as far as being dry. Once the nose dries, we're going to add in some more shadows too. As far as the hat goes, I'm going to leave this base color and add my details right on top. But something that I've noticed is that I think his body's a little bit uneven. So I'm going to go back in here and make a little bit of an adjustment here and try to get a little bit more width over here. Okay, while I am cleaning up his body, something else that you can do is, and I would go over this with another layer of paint anyway to get it nice and dark, and they need to be somewhat the same width on each side or even. So you can take your brush, take the tip of your brush when you have some paint on it and pull it into the beard. So that we can break up this shape and it looks a little bit more natural, like an actual beard. So you don't have to go crazy. A little bit will work because we're going to go back in with white later and we're going to do the same thing but in the other direction. So this just breaks up that line a little, and you can add some darker areas like down here. And what I think is always cute is to do like a little shadow shape right down here by the shoe. And you can leave this area lighter, like his feet are poking out. Okay, I think that looks better. And I can clean up any of this area with my white later, so it's not going to be a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this with the heat gun. So the next thing I want to do is, before I start any of the details, I'm going to grab a smaller brush, like my 0 or my 2, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of this same gray paint, maybe a little bit more water, and I'm going to add a little bit of shadow beneath this little ruff right up. I'm going to go right over the top of his nose. And there's going to be a shadow like right here too, like on the side of his nose. And I'm going to soften all of this out once I rinse my brush off. And take your damp brush and just kind of scrub along the edge here and soften out that shadow. And get a little bit more right here. And these just little things like these shadows, I think they really help add some dimension, and they make it pop. And I think I'm going to add a little shadow under his nose. So I'm going to do the same thing. Rinse out my brush, tap it off so it's damp, not soaking wet, and then I'm going to scrub along this edge here to soften all of that out. There. So I'm going to hit this with the heat gun again, and then I'm going to start detailing out my hat. Okay, I'm going to grab my white gel pen, and I'm going to do some very simple shapes. So I'm going to do like this little rough rectangle shape. And this is a hat, so, you know, it's knitted. So these can be a little wonky like that. And I'm really just kind of scribbling. Make sure that when you're doing like little designs like this, don't forget to add some that are like on the edge of the hat. And make sure to follow the curve of the hat as well. So if you have the hat bending over, these little designs are going to bend over also. And that is as simple as that. I'm going to do a little more complex details on these two. For this guy, I just wanted to show you how easy, if you wanted to do just one gnome, how quick this can be actually. So I'm going to grab my bleed-proof white, and I usually work with this in the lid. So I'm going to grab some and just put it in the lid. And I'm using a fairly big brush. This is a size 4. And the reason I'm using a bigger brush is because I want to cover a lot of area with the beard. And I'm going to start at the bottom because I want most of this to be in shadow up here, and I want the white part of the beard to be towards the bottom. So I'm just going to start using like the belly of the brush on the side and just start to pull up and get, so I can get a lot of white on there in one go. And then for the individual hairs, I'm going to start pulling down the way a beard would grow, like that. And hopefully you can see that. And you can make some little, you know, like some rogue hairs, which just, I think, makes it look even that much better. And my intention is to break up this line, this hard edged line that I've got. And I'm going to start getting more and more sparse with the white the closer I come to these shadow areas, because I want those to be seen. I don't want to completely kill all the shadow that I just put in here. And that'll give it some nice dimension too. So this is where you can play with the shape of the beard as well. So maybe I want this to come down to a real point. So something like that. And I'm going to do the same thing for this part of the hat and also for this little ball at the top. And you can also use your gel pen to do that. So for this little part on the hat, this part up here, I feel like would be, you know, whiter and less in shadow. And we decided this side was our shadow side, so I'm going to make this side a little bit more filled in. And I want to break that edge up here also. And you can leave the bottom where we added the shadow a little bit less white. And then over here is our shadow side. So maybe I'll do less on this side and let more of that shadow peek through. And if you go over some of those shadows that we put in a minute ago, you can always go back and clean those up after this is dry. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. But you know what? This time I think I'm going to use my gel pen just so that I can show you that it works with that as well. I wanted to use the ink for the beard because I can cover more area a lot faster than I can with just this gel pen. But for this little ball up here, I want to keep this bottom part, I think, a little bit more in shadow. So I'm going to concentrate most of the white on this side. And I'm just working in little circles. Like that. And I would call him completely finished. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to let you watch me work on these two. And then when we come to the end of this, we'll add a couple of extra little, things like the lettering and maybe some splatter. We'll see. I don't know. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to work on this, and it's going to all be sped up. So I have finally finished up all three of these gnomes as far as the beard and the body. I also added a little white highlight on the nose. And you can see I made a couple of mistakes here, and it's not a big deal. I can go back and scrub this out. So I'm going to start working on the hats now. And we put in our little shadows on the hats. And anytime that you're working on something, it doesn't matter if it's a hat or if it's a vase, you always want to put in your shadows and highlights prior to putting any sort of print or detail on top of it. It'll just look a little bit more realistic. And I'm not obviously going for super realism here, but it's always a good idea, like I said, to get it in before the details. It'll be a lot easier. So I'm going to start over here on this little hat. And actually, the one thing I did want to show you, we talked about these brushes for lifting out color. And in order to get this kind of like knitted hat look, I like to go back in and wet my brush, and I'm going to make a little line here. And you can just kind of go back and forth. And it's always helpful to have a piece of paper towel, a little corner that you rip off, and just blot it out. So I'm following the curve of the hat so that it looks like it's, a little three-dimensional. And I'm just using my brush and some water to lift out these dark gray areas. And that'll help give it like that kind of knitted look. And it obviously works better on the dark areas than it will on the light areas. So on the light areas of this hat, instead of lifting out, I'm gonna add a real light wash of like little stripes going through here to indicate kind of that knitted hat look. Just make sure that you have a damp brush. You don't want it like super watery because it'll just make a mess. And then just take your paper towel and then blot it out. So I'm going to do that on all of the dark areas, and I'm going to do it over here in the red as well. Okay, for this gnome over here, I think what I want to do is like a little pattern. And I think that it helps me anyway, if I pencil in some kind of guidelines for myself. So if I want to do, and I think maybe a white pencil would work better on this. So if you have a little white charcoal pencil or pastel pencil, that will help. So if I want to do some like little zigzag patterns like this, and the reason I'm going to pencil this in like this is that, and I just gave myself a little bit of a guide. I'm going to take my white gel pen and I'm going to make these little shapes that look like it's been knitted, and they're just little triangles without the bottom. And you can do X's, you know, that works too. Anything to just kind of give the impression of stitches. So something like that. It doesn't have to be, you know, super intricate or anything. We're just kind of giving the impression of. So something else you can do is you can do like little diamond shapes. You know. So in the dark gray areas, I'm going to do white. And then I think in these other areas, the lighter gray, I'm going to do red. So I'm going to go in here and make these little shapes here out of triangles and try to follow my pattern here as best I can. And if it comes out a little bit wonky, that's okay. And maybe up here, maybe we just do a couple of little white stitches. Like that. And maybe down here. So now I can go in with my red Posca pen, and I would do the same thing. So I would grab my pencil and just sketch in, you know, what I want as far as a pattern shape. So maybe I just do a stripe on this part. So I've got a guideline that I can follow. And make sure that when you do your guideline that you're following the roundness of the hat. just like I did here. So you don't want to make a straight line across because it'll flatten your hat out. So I'm gonna very carefully hold my pen, you know, like perpendicular so I can use the point. And I'm just gonna go in here and follow my line and make these little triangle shapes. Just like that. And I'll do the same thing up here. And maybe we'll do a couple in the dark gray areas too, and up here at the top. Okay, so for this hat over here, I'm gonna do kind of the opposite. I'm gonna use the red in the gray areas, and maybe I'll do something like this. I'll do some big triangles and I'll fill those in completely with red. We'll see what that looks like. Something like that. Okay, now I'm going to grab my white pen and we're going to go in here and add a few more details, and then we'll move on to the lettering. Okay, so that's how I would go through in detail. And as you can see, even if you make a couple of mistakes and it's not exact, it still reads like it's a knitted material. So the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to make sure this is dry, and I am going to set up my bottom part here with some washi tape, if I can find it. And that's going to give me the width of my lettering. So I have to figure out where I want my lettering to be, and I'm gonna put my lettering underneath this washi tape. And this is just a really easy way to map out some guides for yourself. Just make sure that all of this is dry before you start putting tape on top of it. So I'm putting a piece of tape on either side. And getting it as close as I can. And then I'm going to pull out this middle piece of tape, and that's going to be the guide for my wording. Now you can break this up into 2 lines of text, which is probably what I'm going to do. And that center line, I'm going to use the middle of his nose as my center guide, and I'm going to say that that's where the middle of my text is going to be. And I think I'm actually going to grab something like a straight edge and give myself those 2 lines of text to work on. So whenever you're doing lettering, you want to write out your text first. So I'm going to grab my scrap piece of paper here, and I'm going to come up with some sort of a greeting, like seasons, greetings. And you can put like from our gnome to yours, or something little punny kind of thing with gnomes. Or you can just say, you know, warmest wishes. So I'm going to use warmest wishes because it's going to be simple. So we count our letters: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You count the space: 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 14. So I've got 14 letters. So I know that number 7 is going to be the middle, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is the T. So that's going to be the middle. So I know that my T is going to go here. And then and then you have, you know, account for your space, and then go in here and start adding in the rest of your text. And then you start at your T and work backwards. So I would do the S, the E, and this isn't so much like writing as it is drawing letters. And you just want to give yourself a guide. So something like that, and it should be pretty centered on your page if you adhere to this. I would suggest using your own handwriting. Do it as neatly as you can. I think that just makes the card have that much more character, instead of trying to mimic, you know, a font or something like that. Just use your own handwriting, and you can embellish this with some metallic if you want, or just go in with a straight like a black pen. So I'm going to use this sign pen, and I'm probably going to speed this part up, and when we come back I'll show you the finished card. Okay, so I have finished my lettering, and all I did was write this out, and then I added a couple little serifs to the print up here. And I'm going to grab my Posca pen and color in my little hearts. And you can embellish your letters any way that you'd like. And I think I'm going to add some little white dots. If I can get this pen going, I'll add some little white dots on some of the some of these legs of the letters, the parts that are thick. So something like that. And I would call this finished after I erase all of the pencil lines. So I am going to show you one more card that I did in a different colorway, so you can get an idea of how you can kind of tweak these cards however you'd like. So I'll show you that next. Okay, so that wraps up this blue one, and I really love blues for wintertime and greeting cards, blue and silver and white, and that's what I wanted to do here. And I used 3 different blues, and then I just added some pattern with a white gel pen, and then for the little Christmas ball, I have some blue metallic paint, and you really can't tell. You can't really see the blue metallic paint, but you could use like a metallic gel pen for that too. And then I have some metallic silver, and I added that to the Christmas ball and some little dots in the background. I did use a blue metallic gel pen for his bow, and then I went over it with like a wash of watercolor because I thought it was too vibrant. So, and I did do a couple of different passes with the ink on the beards because I didn't feel like it was bright enough. So you can do that, go over it a couple of times, or maybe add in some more white strands with your gel pen or your white gouache. So I have 3 here, and they're each a little bit different. These 2 are more similar. The only difference is with this one is I added some watercolor splatter to the background. And yeah, these are really fun, and you can totally change this up. You can just do one gnome right in the middle. You can do several of these cards and pick totally different color palettes. You could do all greens, all reds, mix up your greens and reds. You can add as much metallic or none at all, and you know, change up the sentiment at the bottom too. So I hope to be bringing you some more holiday cards before Christmas gets here, and I will see you then. And meanwhile, have fun painting these, and I would love to see what you make. You can always tag me on Instagram at artbymonica70, and I'm also on Facebook too. So if you feel like sharing, just be sure to tag me. All right, happy painting, everybody. Bye-bye.